Good afternoon. Thank you all very much on behalf of our Chancellor, Jacob Oliva for K-12 Public Schools Division, our Vice Chancellor, Melissa Ramsey for Strategic Improvement, and our Bureau Chief of our Bureau of Exceptional Student Education, Victoria Gatanis. We welcome you all here and we thank you for sticking it out with us for this end of the day session. I know you all have received a lot of great information, and there's going to be some information that we're sharing today that will be a great tie-in to some of the information you learned yesterday, as well as some of the sessions that you attended today. I'm Dr. Erin Sampson. I'm the Deputy Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Exceptional Student Education, and I'm joined today with our Educational Program Director for our Program Accountability Assessments and Data System, known as PADS in our unit. She's our educational program director. If you all have the app, I know on the app it described that she was a hybrid role, which she served in previously. She was our ASD program specialist. So she's bringing some programmatic perspective to our PADS division, as well as we deal with grants, fiscal management, and accountability and data. So our agenda today is we'll be doing an introduction to our Individuals with Disability Education Act data, discussing some survey timelines, key formats and data elements, as well as our database changes for the 2021-2022 school year, data quality concerns in regards to exceptional student IDA educational environment codes and age, least restrictive environment, ESSA 1% cap for participation in the Florida Standards Alternate Assessment, as well as our Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervening Services, known as CCEIS, and student discipline. So we'll be going over some data concerns that we've seen historical trends about and ways that we're trying to provide technical assistance and support to make sure that that data quality is there throughout our districts. And then we'll share some web links and other resources and take some questions towards the end. So our IDA Part B data indicators for K-12, which is also inclusive of our pre-K students with disability, include these performance indicators, as well as some compliance indicators that we look at. These are data that we have to submit annually to our U.S. Department of Education to show both progress and quality of data. So these are, under IDEA, Florida submits a variety of data from the student database and assessment files to the U.S. Department of Education, which is inclusive of child count, educational environments, exit data, discipline, assessment, and of course, personnel. So for all students with disabilities, we transmit aggregated data regarding these students by age, race, ethnicity, gender, LEP status, the type of setting where the child is served, whether it be the regular class, separate class, or also known as resource class, how students exit the system with a standard diploma, certificate, or whether they were a dropout student that we have to code, or whether or not they were suspended or expelled during the school year, and if they participated in assessments or whether or not they were proficient in those assessments. We also submit data on personnel serving students with disability and data about dispute resolution and expenditures. So the federal government uses the data submitted by states to monitor and enforce the IDEA. The United States Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programs reports annually to Congress on progress under the Act. They also publicly publish data from all of the states and make determinations as to whether states are meeting the requirements under IDEA. In retrospect, states are then required to submit LEA determinations, kind of following the same model, looking at progress, looking at data quality and things of that nature. On this slide, you will see a link to where they publish the data for all states. And then as I indicated, it requires us to use that data to make annual reports on our LEA determinations, our CCEIS, as well as LEA performance reports and state performance plans. So accurate data requires teamwork. So as I was saying at the beginning of this presentation, as you'll see, there's a lot of things that you learned yesterday as well as today that's interrelated. Even though this is talking about exceptional student education, there's a lot of areas that impact our data that comes from the general ed environment as well as exceptional student education environment. So we emphasize and we encourage districts to make sure that you have a collaborative team approach to make sure that you have data quality. making sure you're bringing all the personnel to the table that are key stakeholders to make sure that what you're entering as data is accurate and reflective of what's currently going on. And why data quality is so important is because data is a powerful tool. It informs us about instructional efficacies that we may need to increase or improve, as well as areas that may have gaps that we have not known in the past, but that data is indicating that for us. It also impacts funding allocations and financial implications such as CCEIS. It's also crucial when making policy decisions to improve educational outcomes, as I stated, and then of course, federal and state accountability measures. Within our state, we also use this data to help us with our differentiated monitoring system. So as we monitor to student model to districts to utilize a multi-tiered system of support, we also utilize that at the state to differentiate the monitoring and support that we provide to districts. So at tier 1, that's monitoring for compliance, which often is a desktop monitoring. District self-assessments, where districts are allowed the opportunity to look at their own indicators and provide feedback on needs that they need from the state to help them improve some areas. And then of course, submissions and reviews of ESC policies and procedures to make sure that you're in alignment to what was agreed upon and submitted annually or every 3 years to the state. And then of course, we look at bureau or discretionary project support. Based on these data, it may be indicative of risk assessments or emerging issues where we have to come out and provide support based off of some of these factors. So this is kind of giving you a visual of our risk assessment components where we look at organizational data, staff turnover, district size, transition in policy, LEA determinations, looking at those federal indicators we talked about earlier, ESSA federal index data, CCEIS compliance and performance data. The risk assessment can also look at fiscal or programmatic audit results, and then a review of stakeholder communication and IDEA discretionary project access. So this is showing you how it's imperative for data to be accurate, so that way you're not being identified as needing substantial support when in actuality you're actually doing what needs to be done. And now I'll turn it over to Janae to talk about our survey timelines.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to review some of the survey timelines, specifically survey 2 and 5, as well as key formats and data elements for districts reporting student data. Survey 5 due date is July 23rd, 2021. State processing takes place July 19th through the August 20th, 2021, followed by final updates and amendment dates that take place October 31st, 2021. Preliminary survey 5 data is used in order to meet the November 3rd federal reporting due date. So what is survey 5, used for? Discipline data, including restraint and seclusion for students with disabilities, exeter data, withdrawal codes, which are used for determining dropouts, diplomas, and certificates, standard diploma exeter rates for students with disabilities, and lastly, dropout rates for students with disabilities. Survey week takes place October 11th through 15th, 2021, with the due date of October 22nd, 2021, followed by state processing October 18th through November 15th, with a final update and amendment date of December 15th, 2021. Survey 2 is used for membership charts, child counts for federal reporting, regular class placement, early childhood settings, disproportionate representation in special education, and specific disability categories. We're going to review some key formats and data elements. Key formats and data elements for this upcoming school year will remain the same and are listed here on this slide. Please note that grade level will be needed in order to determine which group the 5-year-olds should be counted in. As far as key data elements, they are comprised of student numbers, identifiers, exceptional education, IDEA, educational environments, exceptionality, primary and other exceptionalities, time, total school week, time with non-disabled peers, as well as alternate assessments administered. And for student discipline, I am going to turn it over to Erin.
So for student discipline, some key data elements that are utilized are, of course, discipline/resultant action code, what actually occurred, what was being done, what was the discipline that impacted this resultant code, the incident and the identifier. And then, of course, what's really important here is the duration and the discipline action. As we get further into the conversation and the presentation, I'll be referring back to the House Bill 149. Of course, you heard about that in the legislative update session that was presented yesterday. And then, of course, our student course schedule, the key data elements include the course number. Staff demographics. So we have to report ESC staff data via EdFax and also ESC teacher FTE and ESC paraprofessional. These are the staff demographics that are key data elements that have to be reported, which is inclusive of the district number, social security number, survey, job code, what the primary codes are, and paraprofessional qualification. Codes D were removed and code E was added. So now we'll talk about some database changes for 2021, 2022.
And we have quite a few. So there are some new database changes for the upcoming school year. Let's take a look. The first change is a new database validation tool for the alternate assessment administered and course numbers. And so essentially this new component will serve as a checks and balances tool for districts when reporting students who are scheduled to take the FSAA and enrolled in those access courses. Some benefits to the new tool is to ensure only those students with disabilities with the most significant cognitive disability are taking the FSAA. A new validation and validation message has been added to the student course schedule. It compares the course enrollment to the one-digit alpha indicator used to identify whether or not the student with disabilities will be participating in the FSAA data folio and FSAA performance. Funding source code I can be used for voluntary CEIS expenditures. Districts may use up to 15% of IDEA Part B funds for this purpose. This is reported during Survey 5, only, which ends July 23rd, 2021. We also have diploma code WCO, which still can be utilized for the 2020-2021 school year. This diploma code was added for the 2019-2020 school year to address COVID-related flexibility for those 2020 graduates. This code was applicable to any student who graduated and met all of the requirements to receive a standard diploma and was exempted from required assessments due to cancellation of the 2019-2020 statewide assessments. And now we're going to address some data quality concerns.
Before we move forward, does anyone have any questions of what's been presented thus far? All right, excellent. All right, so we mentioned earlier about data quality concerns that help to drive some of the support that's offered to districts, as well as some support and encouragement that we offer to our neighboring states as well. And the data quality concerns that I'll be discussing will be exceptional student IDEA, educational environment codes / age, and then least restrictive environment. So for LRE, we provided a lot of support and guidance, which is still posted on our FLDOE site during COVID time, to talk about how you would code for least restrictive environment. So our data quality concerns comes in regards to utilizing codes for an age group where it's not applicable, or making sure that we're looking at you're coding a student that's 7 years old, but you're using pre-K codes for ages 3 through 5. So on this chart right here, for students with disabilities ages 3 through 5, excluding kindergarten students who are age 5, they use only these codes, which are K, L, M, S, B, A, or J. So one of our red flags have been when we see districts coding using these codes, and it's for an older age student with disability. For students with disability who are ages 6 through 21, and it can include kindergarten students now who are age 5 or older, uses code C, P, D, F, H, or Z, and determine which one of the codes should apply. So last year we had some changes, data changes, where previously all 5-year-olds were included in these codes, but we knew that we had some 5-year-olds who turned 5 in time enough to be in kindergarten. So that's why this code definition was changed to be inclusive of students who were in pre-K and they're still age 5, and they will be able to use this code. So this excludes kindergarten students who are age 5, and the definitions of the codes are available for you. And then students ages 6 through 21, these are the applicable codes for them, and it includes kindergarten students who are age 5. Time total school week, which is now have to be reported for 5-year-olds who are in kindergarten. So this will be where you report the total amount of time a student with a disability is scheduled to attend school each week. This should be reported in minutes per week. All scheduled times, such as class time, recess, lunch, and time between classes, must be included in the total. So we've had some data quality issues with that as well. Time with non-disabled peers. The total amount of time the student with a disability is with non-disabled peers, including time with school and workplace peers. This should be reported in minutes per week. Includes class time, lunch, recess, and time between classes if this time is spent with non-disabled peers. We found a lot of data quality issues with this one because it wasn't being reported when they were having class time in between with non-disabled peers. So you have to pay close attention to that when you're calculating those minutes per week. A reminder, exceptional student IDEA educational environments is age-based and grade-based, meaning districts should use applicable codes according to the age of the student. So this is what our review process is, especially with LRE verification. Preliminary reports are sent weekly to ESE directors for review after the close of Survey 2. And the state processing until the close of the survey, December 15, 2021. So as we talked about earlier, this is where it is imperative to have those collaborative teams to look at the codes, look at the minutes per week, especially when they're having related services that are provided inside the regular classroom environment, or if it's a pull-out session where they're having it in a resource classroom or a self-contained classroom. Making sure you're going over, are these an accurate reflection of minutes per week? Is this an accurate reflection of where their regular class placement is really taking place? So as Janae indicated, survey week will be October 11th through the 15th of 2021. The due date is October 22nd. State processing will happen between October 18th through November 5th. And then the final update amendment date to turn in corrections is December 15th, 2021. So this is showing you something that I alluded to earlier about how we were seeing codes. So as you can see in the green, this is for educational environments by district ages 3 through 5. The green are the codes that should be used for that age group. As you see in the yellow highlights, these are where codes for the older groups were being utilized for this age group. So this is kind of what we go through when we're looking at data quality. Similar to this one. Now this is age 6 through 21. We should not see the codes going towards your left since you all are sitting down. We shouldn't see those codes. We should see the codes in the green for that age group. So data quality checks for IDA educational environment codes, we use report F71000, which is known as the ESE IDEA educational environment by student, by school, It's downloaded from the Northwest Regional Data Center, and it provides student level data. Students who do not have the appropriate educational environment code and age grade level correlation will not get counted in the official child count that is submitted to EdFacts. And here's a sample layout of that report. So how has this been working for us? What have we seen? We have noticed that since we've been providing support and guidance, that there is a trend of there being data cleanup and less errors each year. So as you can see, in 2008 and 9, the yellow bar is before. This is before the correction period. So this is the initial data that's submitted. Look at all of those errors. And then after the correction period, the errors dropped significantly. There were still some errors, but it wasn't as impactful or as significant as it was before the correction period. And then if you look at the last one, which is 2020, 2021, the before the correction period, the amount of errors significantly dropped because now we're being more cognizant of those errors that were being made in the past. And this is breaking it down for those like myself who you look at the bars, you see it, but you really need to get the information laid out for you. So in 17-18, there were 403 errors identified after the correction period. In 2020, 2021, 3 errors were identified after the correction period. So way to go. So common questions that we receive regarding the LRE verification process: how do I know which students were coded incorrectly? Can you send me a list of students who were coded incorrectly? Unfortunately, our office does not have access to student level data. Therefore, you must go to your MIS IT staff, and they should be able to download that F71,000 for you to review and see which students were coded incorrectly. Another question we received: when is the last day I can submit corrections for LRE? The last day for corrections is December 15th, 2021. However, it is recommended that you get your corrections submitted as soon as possible to ensure your data updates and processed correctly. Any questions? What's the date for the last correction? December 15th. Get a sticker. All right, so now we'll talk about more data quality concerns.
Okay, data quality concerns in regards to ESSA 1% cap for participation in the Florida Standards Alternate Assessment, as well as the Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervening Services, also known as CCEIS. So ESSA reaffirms that for states choosing to use an alternate assessment, this is an appropriate assessment only for students with the most significant cognitive disability. This means that states, districts, schools, and IEP teams need to think carefully about which students should be included in the alternate assessment, which, as indicated in ESSA, is only those students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. We're going to review a timeline for Florida as far as the 1% waiver. So a memo was sent to districts on July of 2017, explaining that the 1% cap is at the state level and appropriate participation in the alternate assessment would be monitored. On June 4, 2019, the Florida Department of Education received a letter from the United States Department of Education stating that during the 2017 and 18 school year, Florida had rates of the alternate assessment participation that were relatively high in all subject areas: reading, language arts, mathematics, and science. The state is currently at 1.5% in ELA, 1.6% in math, and 1.6% in science, per the 2020-21 school year Survey 2 course enrollment data. The majority of districts are above the 1% cap. On December 2nd of 2019, the Florida Department of Education submitted a request for a 1-year waiver from the 1% participation cap. On February 21st, 2020, We were granted a waiver request releasing the Florida Department of Education from the previous Title I Part A conditions and placing new required conditions. On March 26th of 2021, the U.S. Department of Education granted our request made on November 30th, 2020 for a 1-year waiver extension with conditions. One of those conditions included a justification requirement where now we are, where districts do have to submit, if they are over the 1% cap, they do have to submit a justification that is made publicly available, provided that such information does not reveal personally identifiable information about an individual student. The required justification information is collected via the annual SPMPs, and the focus of the Florida's training and technical assistance will continue to be on ensuring that IEP teams make appropriate, individualized, and database decisions for each student. So how is participation of the FSAA determined? Well, first, the IEP team has to decide how the student will participate in the statewide assessment. Parental consent must be obtained annually. IEP teams are encouraged to use the assessment planning resource guide for IEP teams to help in their decision-making process. And then lastly, student performance standards, courses, and assessments must all align. How is the 1% calculated? You take the total students with disabilities taking the FSAA and grades tested and divide that by the total students and grades tested. And that will determine your cap. The denominator is comprised of both those students taking the FSA and the FSAA. Listed on this slide are formats and data elements that will remain the same for the 2021-22 school year. Let's take a look at Florida's state level FSAA 1% cap data. Displayed on this slide is our state level data regarding the FSAA 1% cap determined by subject area. As you can see, Florida has remained above the 1% cap consecutively for 3 or more years in all subject areas. Here we have the number of students reported as taking the FSAA that are not enrolled in access courses. The key to remember is alignment. So if you have a student that is scheduled to participate in the FSAA, they also need to be enrolled in at least one access course and be receiving instruction on alternate assessments standards. This slide displays data for the number of students reported as taking the FSAA without an IEP. Rule 6A 1.0943, Section 5 of the Florida Administrative Code states that the decision whether a student with the most significant cognitive disability will participate in the statewide standards alternate assessment is defined and made by the IEP team and recorded on the IEP. Therefore, we should not have students scheduled to take the FSAA that do not have an IEP. As part of Florida's focus and support to districts, beginning with the 2020 Assessment Administration on the FSAA, the Florida Department of Education implemented a new assurance process in which districts will provide supporting data for students who require the alternate academic assessments. A memo was sent to district superintendents from Chancellor Oliva on November 22nd, 2019, regarding the assurance process. The purpose of the assurances is to ensure that and certify that districts have verified their supporting data for students who require alternate assessment based on alternate academic achievement standards, and affirm that the FSAA is the most appropriate assessment aligned with the student's educational needs. Here we have the assurance process that takes place where district personnel that's designated by their superintendent will be responsible for providing the verification of those assurances for each student who is recommended to participate in the FSAA. A systematic and collaborative effort must take place between alternate assessment coordinators and district assessment coordinators as this data is verified and securely transferred to the Florida Department of Education. Districts should seek support through their school level assessment coordinators, staffing specialists, and case managers to assist in their data verification process. So this slide is a visual representation of the new database validation tool that I referenced earlier in this presentation. An example is displayed here that would apply to the new validation tool where student data is entered that may prompt a validation message if all three are not in alignment as far as a student being scheduled to take the FSAA, being enrolled in those access courses, and being instructed on via the FSA, the standard alternate assessments. The Florida Department of Education conducted data checks with all districts regarding 1%. Some common themes were identified and are listed on this slide. The first one is inaccurate or outdated data being reported. All data elements must reflect the status of the student during the survey period. Another was students with a K code were reported indicating that the student was listed as having a specific learning disability. Exceptionalities that students have been dismissed from must not appear in either the exceptionality or primary of exceptionalities other data element. Lastly, English language learners being inappropriately coded for access course codes. We're going to switch gears to discuss the data element concerns regarding comprehensive coordinated early intervening services, also known as CCEIS. CEIS is voluntary for students not currently identified K through 12 through grade. Districts can use up to 15% of their IDEA allocations for CEIS, whereas CCEIS is mandatory if a district is identified as having significant disproportionality. Districts must use 15% of their IDEA allocations to provide services such as professional development, educational and behavioral evaluations, services, and additional supports. Students of a particular race are at least 3 times or more likely to be identified as disabled when compared to all other races combined. The calculation is repeated for students with disabilities, students identified as intellectually disabled, students identified as emotional behavioral disorder, students with specific learning disabilities, students with autism spectrum disorder, other health impaired, and students identified as speech or language impaired. This data is captured during Survey 2 for student demographic data, as well as the exceptional student format for their primary and other exceptionalities. Students with disabilities ages 6 through 21 of any race are at least 3 times more likely to be placed in separate classes or other separate environments when compared to all other races combined. The calculation is used for the total of all disabled students only. This data, student data, is also captured during Survey 2. Incidents of removal of students with disabilities through in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, or expulsion for students with disabilities of any given race are at least 3 times more likely to occur when compared to all other races combined. The calculation is used for the total of all disabled students only. Here we have categories in regards to in-school and out-of-school suspensions. In-school suspensions must be reported less than or equal to 10 days. In-school suspensions more than 10 days must be reported. Out-of-school suspensions or expulsions less than or equal to 10 days must be reported, as well as out-of-school suspensions and expulsions more than 10 days must be reported. Here we just have a visual representation of the CCEIS criteria that is utilized to capture and report the disproportionalities in student subgroups. And now we will go over some data quality concerns.
Before we move on, do we have any questions for anything that was presented? Excellent. All right. So this is in regards to student discipline. As I indicated before, House Bill 149 was recently signed, and we will be working collaboratively across the department to talk about implementation, guidance, and things of that nature moving forward in regards to that House bill. But as you learned yesterday with the presentation, it prohibits the use of seclusion on students with disabilities, and monthly de-identified restraint incidents, data reporting, it will begin hopefully on, well, not hopefully, it will begin on October 1st, 2021 on the DOE website. Of course, we continue to develop standards for use of seclusion and restraint, things of that nature. So those guidance documents will be forthcoming since it was recently signed. But you will see more information about that if you go back into the app and pull up the presentation. I believe is what Mr. Bowen presented on yesterday for the legislative updates. So data quality checks on student discipline. You need to pay close attention, as I mentioned before, to duration and the discipline action. Discipline/resultant action code, and then the duration of that discipline action. Length, which is known as duration, of in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, and or expulsions are reported. The count of discipline incidents, the count of students disciplined within school, out of school, or expulsions. Some of the other things were not meeting state established thresholds for suspension, expulsions, risk ratios could have fiscal and LEA determination implications. In school and out of school suspensions, including expulsions, should be 10 days or less. And also we're reporting if it's more than 10 days. So this is an example of the discipline resultant action code. So it will be indicating whether it was seclusion, mechanical restraint, or a physical restraint. Restraint and seclusion data, it is important that all restraints and seclusion are submitted to Bs via the restraint and seclusion application, and also be submitted via the automated student database. So there's two areas. The number of restraints and seclusions submitted via the student database should be equal to or greater than the count submitted via the B's restraint and seclusion application. So I'm going to stop here. One of those areas is dealing with all students, right? The other one is dealing with students with disabilities. So if we see that the number is not equal or greater to, that means it's a discrepancy. So that indicates a red flag. That means there's some data quality issues going on. So that's another indication or activity that can be done at the district level with your collaborative teams on looking at, are our numbers reflective of the data that we're putting in? Did we miss something? Do we need to go back and make some corrections? Remember that this data is submitted to the Office for Civil Rights for all students. Review district level users and provide any additions or deletions on the single sign-on system for restraint and seclusion reporting. Provide contact information for a restraint and seclusion administrator if it is someone other than the ESE director. So by default, we normally assume that the ESE director is the administrator of this, unless you indicate to us that there should be a change and there should be someone else identified as the administrator for the restraint and seclusion reporting system. The portal to access the information is on your district single sign-on contact. So there's some redevelopment that was going on prior to House Bill 149. So there will probably be some other updates being made, but the redevelopment that was already taking place is that the reporting system is now for any student who was restrained or secluded, It includes students receiving exceptional student education services, students with Section 504 plans pursuant to the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and students who are not receiving exceptional student education. So the system was being inclusive of all students. Another change that was coming with similar features from the single sign-on system include entering the same reporting features for incidents of restraint and seclusion, but there will be some new attributes related to duration of restraint and seclusion incidents, such as indicating duration over 60 minutes with the explanation, and adding parent notification fields to include date and method of parent notification. That's gonna be another addition. The view will also be different in the updated restraint and seclusion single sign-on system. Instead of a single line down for entries, it will be now sorted items into columns. Addition of reports section for administrators. Districts will soon be able to generate restraint and seclusion reports by district and school, which will be great for providing a multi-tiered system of support with schools that you need to target for substantial needs assistance, and those schools that are showing effective practices for improving not utilizing restraint or seclusion. The system will be set to notify the Bureau of certain restraint and seclusion incidents entered into the system to allow follow-up to the districts. And then districts will have until 30 days from the date the report was finalized to make any changes necessary. At the end of every month, incident reports will be finalized and will not be able to be updated. So the website, that was the link for the website. To request a list of current district level users, to edit, add district level users, or update district level users' email addresses, contact Steve Barnes, and this is his email address, or you can contact the Bureau's phone number directly to ask to speak with him. So if you have a change in personnel, anything, make sure that you contact Steve so he can update it and make sure that the right notification and access levels are being added to those people. Only district level users can add or remove school level users and make changes to email addresses if necessary. District level users must edit users that have changed schools or remove users that are no longer employed at the district. And this is just a screenshot of what that single sign-on screen looks like in case you haven't seen it before. So here are some questions or best practices and things that have come in. How do I know how many or which students were reported with restraint or seclusion via the B's application? ESC and MIS staff should develop a process for ensuring these data are submitted in both systems. So like we were talking about before, if you're seeing that the numbers are not aligning, something's off, having those conversations, having a process in place of where you can review and validate your data will be a best practice. Withdrawal codes. For exiting data, IDEA requires for states to report exiting reasons for all students ages 14 through 21 during the school year. The unduplicated number of students with disabilities who are aged 14 through 21 were in special education at the start of the reporting period and were not in special education at the end of the reporting period. It's showing you the survey data source, survey 5 preliminary, the reporting period. So you should have all of this information ready for exiting data, reporting that exiting data. And here are some frequently asked questions in regards to the exiting data. If an ESC student is graduating with both a concordant score for the reading requirement and a waiver of the Algebra 1 requirement, which diploma code should be reported? A WFT for the concordant score or a WRW because of the waiver? Which code takes precedence? The answer, either diploma code would be correct. No standard diploma takes precedence over another one. Another question we get sometimes, is the standard diploma rate the same as the federal cohort graduation rate? No, the standard diploma rate is the number of students with disabilities exiting during a single year who exited with a standard diploma, whereas the federal cohort graduation rate is based upon a 4-year cohort on the same schedule to graduate within 4 years. Our LEA performance report, it is published annually on the DOE website. It's a tool in our planning for systemic improvement, so the link is available with you in this presentation. It includes information about how districts perform compared with state level targets in Florida's state performance plan required by IDEA. And this is a snapshot of what that looks like. And then here are some important web links that you can utilize. We have our student and staff database manuals, our Bureau of Exceptional Student Education website, as well as our PADS website. More important links that you can utilize when you access the presentation. How we calculate a calculation guide for our state performance report and annual performance report, and juvenile justice education. Are there any questions? Well, once again, we thank you very much for being an engaged audience. What's that correction period again? December 15, 2021. I'm Dr. Erin Sampson. This is Janae Duclos-Francois. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Remember, if there's any changes to that single sign-on system, contact Steve Barnes, and Cindy Holloman is our data manager. We'll get that to you as well. Thank you.
Good job.
Woo, woo.
On the dot, yeah.